Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Option Menu Crew podcast. This is episode 25. We're cruising right along. And with you today, your hosts are myself, Ryan, and we have Mike and Ed joining us today. Mike, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Fantastic. And Ed, great to hear from you again.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Oh, I'm always here, so nothing's new.
You've been here very consistently, and we appreciate you for it. So, on today's episode, we're going to be talking about game reviews, video game reviews specifically, and all different stuff relating to that. Typically, game reviews are great for figuring out whether or not you want to buy a game and things like that. So we're just going to get right into it today. And the first question to the room, of course, is how do you use reviews? Like, what do you prefer to do? Do you read them? Do you watch videos? That kind of thing, or some of your favorite places? So, Mike, why don't you just start us off? Where do you like to get your? Do you use reviews for figuring out whether or not you want to buy games, and what kind of reviews are those? What kind of reviews are those?
Yeah, I do use reviews, but I'm also pretty sad when I feel like I want a game, but I do use reviews to reinforce that, or if I see that a review is terrible, then I might reconsider and be like, oh, maybe this isn't such a great idea to get this game.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, though, I'd say I like a lot of video reviews over reading reviews. For me, I've used Game Explain and IGN in order to see what I like and what I don't like about a game. But yeah, overall, I'd say that I prefer the video reviews. But I have also subscribed to different magazines in the past, and I've obviously read reviews too. So
yeah, magazines aren't really a thing anymore.
I still get Game Informer, but
I tried to get it, but they didn't send me my issues, so I'm kind of giving up on the printed word for.
Did you
for
cancel
game
or?
news. I didn't cancel. They just stopped sending me.
That's probably for
weird.
the best.
Yeah.
I mean, the information's online.
They've been sending it to me, but I haven't been reading it for some reason. I don't know why.
They were fun at school, though. Reading. I always went to the library when I was in middle school. I would just go and read the game magazines at the school library. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
They had them in the library?
Sometimes people would donate them.
They had them in the school library.
Yeah, I remember
reading Game Pro and looking at all the screenshots and.
I remember the demo discs. I love those, where they'd give you the PlayStation 2 demo disc, and then I'd play Lego Star Wars on it for hours.
I played the God of War demo so many times.
Yeah, I remember.
Before you had that.
A bit off topic.
Yeah, I remember getting a few demo discs from from different game magazines. I had one PlayStation demo disc. Actually, it might have been the pack-in demo disc for PlayStation. I'm just confusing it because I didn't buy PlayStation Magazine too much. I usually bought the more generic ones, other than Nintendo Power, because Nintendo's always been kind of its island. But I do remember when it dawned on me that most of the magazines that were specific were extremely biased, and they're not the most critical because they're the fan-oriented one. No, they're the most biased because they're paid for by the companies. Figuring that out about Nintendo Power, I'm like, oh, this makes me really sad. But
yeah, but I love Nintendo Power.
Right. But that doesn't mean you weren't getting. That doesn't mean you were getting good information, other than the plain press release statements that they were basically doing to advertise their products. But getting back on topic though, Ed. So what's your process when it comes to reviewing or looking at reviews for video games that you may or may not be purchasing?
So, I use reviews for different things. I'd say I if I'm looking for information about a game, about some of its features or details that might sway my purchasing decision, I almost prefer a written review because I can usually skim it more easily to find the relevant detail. Like, whether it's a question, I don't know, about difficulty or some gameplay element that I'm like, how is this going to work? Is this going to be to my tastes? But I do like video reviews. I have more often gone back and watched video reviews for games that I have actually played. Um, Sometimes I just want to see what certain YouTubers will almost do more of a overview in terms of themes or analysis in the reviews. Some like, I know, Mike, you like Game Explain, but they're typically like matter of fact. Like, here are the details about the game. It's like a product review. It's like they're kind of going over whether or not you should buy or play this game. But I've watched other YouTubers where their idea is more of a critical lens. But as far as like actually swaying my decision, reviews do have favor into my decision, but I don't think it's a score thing. I think it's more of like, I know what things I like in games and what could potentially cause me to dislike a game, and I want to know if a potential purchase has that deal breaker or not. So I look for specific details about games when I'm reading a review.
Mm-hmm. And
From like an informative sense, less from a critical sense.
You think that Game Explain is just like from a like just giving out like basic details? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, I don't watch them that much, but I think they're giving out the kind of information I would need. But I mean that some YouTubers actually they tend to take a more high level critical lens to things than just a
Yeah, they're just
like
they're more casual. Yeah, they're more
yeah,
casual
like
with their
one
reviews.
YouTuber that I thought has done some interesting, and I don't want this to turn into going over every YouTuber, but I'm just saying, like, some of them have um longer, more detailed videos than others. So those are the kinds that I would like to go back and watch, like if I've already played a game, to kind of see. And I don't think that's uncommon. Lots of people, I think, even it makes sense if you like a movie or a game or a book. It's fun to go back and read what a critic thought of it. um yeah, and sometimes that's even better than reading it before, because you don't necessarily want your opinion to be flavored by someone else's.
Yeah, that can be tricky. And you brought up some good points that we will be bringing up after. So I was just going to touch on, for me, I usually look at a couple different reviews to try and figure out whether or not I'm getting something. I agree. Video has been super helpful now. Video games being such a visual medium, you want to be able to see certain things in action. You want to know it on the more technical side for like me. I want to know if the frame rate's good. Does this look fun? And sometimes and I can very much admit that I'm a very visual spectacle kind of person. Doesn't necessarily mean it has to be like the most realistic graphics. It just needs to look like Devil May Cry style combat. Is this like Bayonetta, Devil May Cry? Is this like super actiony, flashy, or is this more of like a thinking game? And it depends on what game. I'm a sucker for a good visual art style, but seeing the video is definitely helpful. Um, and I found myself on occasion watching a Twitch streamer play a game of that I'm interested in, to see them like live play it, because that's the most organic way to see someone trying a game out if you can't get your hands on it through like what we said, like rentals or demos or other ways of trying it. Um, I like to look at the Metacritic just to kind of see where on average things are popping out. Then I'll look at uh, some more specific reviews that for the outlets that I know are notable or um, have been around for a while, or that I know like, oh, this person definitely jives with my views, so I'm going to look and see what they're saying. But we've all been gaming for such a long time that for us it's a little different than like a more casual person who may not truly understand their taste fully, and we've kind of all settled into our rhythms there. So like I know what I'm looking for, and I like to find out like, okay, is there any deal breakers? Kind of what you were saying, Ed, there. And I do like things a bit more technical. And so like I like Digital Foundry when they go over like performance aspects. And while some of their visual stuff, like that's cool and I can't really tell what you're talking about, or like I see that and I'm like, I know I'm not going to notice that when I'm watching. But I do appreciate the frame rate breakdown and knowing that it's like I'm likely to see or experience this. It's optimized, so I may want to run my settings on my PC lower or run a specific way or be careful on whether or not I play it on the PlayStation or on console versus PC. Um, and then I'll check out a couple different things, and then depending on what the game is, because I do play a lot of RPGs, so one of the things that is always tricky is avoiding spoilers, even sometimes gameplay, although I really don't find gameplay spoilers, and by that I mean like mechanics and things like that. I don't really find that spoiler. If someone's gonna say, "Oh, you're gonna get this big gun by the end of the game," I'm like, "Okay, that's fine." But if it's like how you get that gun is like a big plot spoiler, then I'm like, I don't really want to know that. But I'm fine with knowing like the mechanical aspects of what features are in the game and things like that. And then so I'll usually like I'll skim maybe the first like paragraph or two, and then I'll skip to like the bottom of an article and read like their closing paragraph because it's usually like a good summation of yeah where their impressions are positive or negative. um it doesn't matter to me whether or not it has a score, but I do appreciate when there's like a score and then like a little bullet point breakdown of like pros and cons, positive or negative. So I do like things like that, and we're going to dive a little more into what we like to see in reviews further into the conversation. So
You made an interesting point about spoilers, though. I mean, it is very personal what people consider to be a spoiler.
mhm,
Like, I know you and I are playing the Nier Replicant
mhm,
remaster,
yep,
and that has a lot of endings, and it's like if you want to see all the endings, you have to do a certain thing. But is it a spoiler to look like is it a spoiler to look up how to do that? Because maybe someone would even consider it a spoiler to even know that there were different endings. Or
yep,
I when my friend recently played, I let him borrow Fire Emblem Three Houses, and it was well publicized by Nintendo that there was like a first and second half to that game, and there was a time skip in the middle.
mhm.
But I was talking to him; he didn't know anything about that, so he went into that game blind, not knowing stuff that anyone who was following the pub the PR about it would know. So
Yep.
that's like it's interesting to think that if you really go in blind, there's a not lot more that you might discover than someone who had even just been reading news about it, because so much stuff comes out about a game that maybe. I mean, I'm not big of I don't want a plot spoiler, but I'm fine knowing stuff about the game going in, but some people are not.
Right. And I've had friends that definitely wanted like full media blackouts because it's the next entry in a series that they're super into, and I'm gonna buy it regardless. I don't want to know anything else going into it. And I'm just like, okay. And in my experience, while I can respect that, at the same time, I try to mitigate or monitor my intake because I have definitely had certain things with preview coverage where there's been, or even certain reviews where they mention, okay, well, you might want to watch out for this, or like this seems like it's going to be grindy, or you can mitigate these frustrations by doing this. And I really appreciate knowing that stuff, and it helps me tolerate or know that it's worth getting over, or that there's a way around it, or that this is going to be there, and I can mentally prepare to deal with it. And I could say like when we talked about like 13 Sentinels, Ed, and when you kind of explained some of the gameplay and other people talked about it as well, because well, a lot of people didn't want to talk about it, and then when you were able to give me some frank answers, I was like, okay, well, all right, I'm gonna go. Like you talked me into it, and I gave it a shot and beat it, and now I have my opinion of it. But yeah, I appreciate that. So I find it a little weird when people really do like a full media blackout when it's like you know, don't you? And eventually they usually crack for. It's always all frustrating when they tell me like, no, 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 and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, how's it going? And it's like, oh yeah, I watched all the trailers now. It's like, what? Why didn't you like? Okay, so like, what happened? It's like, well, I cracked, couldn't wait. It's like, oh my god, like why, you know? So you're right. It is completely super personal. I try my best to respect that. I really just get disappointed because I like to talk to people about video games. That's why we do this podcast. So uh, that's the only time that's the real source of that disappointment. Otherwise, I completely respect people's personal desires and how they want to absorb a game and preview coverage and things like that. Um, but let's get into the first big topic, which of course, when you're talking about reviews, is the thing you can't avoid, and that's been a evolving discussion ever since, is review scores. Like, a lot of big outlets have been changing their systems to get rid of review scores. Then there's a couple big ones that still have it. And I want to approach this point by point because there's a lot of aspects to like the review scores. So let's first go around and say, do you like review scores and that you prefer to read ones that have it? Do you dislike them and that you'd like to see fewer of them, or like you're in between where it's like you can kind of take it or leave it? So before we get into more specifics, just how do you feel about the idea of us putting a number to a review score in general? So Mike, I'll go to you first. What's just your general opinion of review scores?
I like review scores, but I also I also enjoy some that don't have review scores. As I mentioned before, Game Explain does like the disliked, liked a lot, or just liked. I can't remember all of them, but they just do those general ones versus like saying this game is a 7.753 or something like that. But
yeah,
but I do
Pie out of 5 stars.
I will I will scroll. I'll scroll down to the bottom of IGN or another big review site, and I'll look at the specific score, and I'll decide, or I'll do that quickly if I don't have time or just want to grab some info quickly. So I think it can be helpful too.
Okay. And Ed, your general feelings about review scores in general?
I think a good whole numbers 1 through 10 is pretty good. I don't know if you really need to get into decibels to describe the quality of a game. It doesn't bother me, but I do like when they include a review score. Like, I know you said, what is it, Kotaku and Polygon, they don't have review scores. I think other ones don't, but I get what they're going at, where they want to like encourage people to read the reviews.
Yeah.
But I do like the ability just to at least have some measure of comparison between reviews.
What about the -5 to +5 score rating system?
So that's the funny thing.
I don't know anyone who does that, but that would be an interesting idea.
Yeah, so that's the funny thing is like
Yeah,
there's really only a couple different scales that when it comes to the numbers, and a lot of them are kind of lies or presentation, like Mike was getting at, but or what you were saying there. So there's really a couple different systems. There's I already kind of stated this earlier. So for me, in general, I can kind of take it or leave it with review scores. I think it is very important to read like the content, but it can be tricky based on what information you want to absorb. People's writing styles are different, so they could be more or less elaborate or vague, and that can be more or less helpful. So that's really tricky. And then I do like to kind of look at the review scores just to get an opinion of like, okay, are people trending positively or negatively? But I would agree with Mike that I'm sorry, Mike, I'm not sure if this is exactly what you were saying, but I do prefer more abstract review scores where it's like, buy it, try it, ignore it. Something that's like very like verbal and more I want to say vague, but I guess it's not vague, but it's like not so concrete in like the numeric scores, because I think when we get into the cataloging of score by numbers, people get really hung up on like a 7 versus an 8, because like an 8 everyone goes is like generally good, but like a 7 people start to like think twice.
I was basically saying that I think both of them have their different use case scenarios. Like for certain ones, you could, you're just looking to get a quick number, or for other ones, you just want to hear like whether they like the game or they didn't like the game. So yeah, I'm just saying for a use case scenario. Yes.
Right. And so there's a couple different systems that we see. There's like the 5-star system. So that's the 5-point system. Then there's the 10-point system. And 10-point includes if they do like half stars, or like, 1.5, 2.5, something like that. That's a 10-point scale, or 1 through 10. Then there's the 20-point scale, which is where you've got 1 through 10, but they can do like 9.5s or 7.5s, that kind of stuff. That's a 20-point scale. And then there's the 100-point scale, which is any increments where it's got 100 increments, and that could be 1 through 100, or it could be like 1.1, 1.2, 7.8, those kind of things. And people, it's a lot of just presentation, but ultimately it breaks down into just those kind of point scales that most people use. And some people get a little playful with it, and they'll do like a 4-star system instead of that, which can be a 4-point or an 8-point system, depending on whether or not they do like half stars and whatnot. So
and you have like a yes, no, maybe kind of like, or a thumbs up, thumbs down. Some people it's almost binary. Like, do I recommend this or not? Or you have some outlets will do, buy, wait, or rent, or if they're thinking about, there's a lot of ways to do it that don't involve points as well.
Right, and that's what I was throwing back to with my original sample there, is that I do agree more with those kind of descriptor ratings rather than a numerical score. While the numerical score can be nice for at a glance, I think the general public gets too hooked on those numbers, and like certain things like, well, I guess, general question as well to you guys. How do you feel about a game when it's like rated like a 7 out of 10 versus when it's an 8 out of 10? Like, do you feel like a 7 is leaning towards, well, maybe I should be skeptical, and 8 is like almost like, oh yeah, I'm probably going to have a good time? Do you feel like that? Or like where on like a 10-point scale, where do your feelings fall when things are rated on the 10-point scale? Let's go over that.
I think 7 is good. And I think for me, when I see a 7, I still look at it as a positive.
Mm-hmm.
When it's a 6, I start to be like, I don't know, but definitely like 5 or below, I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I want this game.
Do you know if you've played any games that were considered like 5 or lower? Have you like gone back and ever saw like, oh man, this was reviewed pretty poorly, but I love this game? I'm trying to think of that right now myself. Ed, where do you fall? Like, where are your feelings on like the traditional 10-point scale? Like, how do you feel about the different numbers? Like, where's your buy mark? Where's your hesitant mark? Where's your like no way mark?
8 is kind of my cutoff to where I think like I'm pretty certain to buy it. 7 makes me hesitate because I guess it's not that low, but I mean 7 means that there were enough problems where it might not be recommended to everyone. Like there has to be specific things about. I don't get. Death Stranding scored well into the 80s on Metacritic, so I don't think that it was like 80.
That was just IGN.
But yeah, that was just IGN that was wrong. No, but yeah, 7
too
is
high. Yeah, wrong by being too high. Yeah, I agree.
I'd say, yeah, 7 is where I'm like, maybe. I mean, there's so many games that do score really well, and like, so it's hard for me to take a risk on a game that. I'm trying to think, like, what games have I bought recently? Like, I don't know. Most of the games that I don't even know what the scores of all the games I bought have been, but I guess if I went, the ones I can think of that I've bought have been scored. I don't think any of them have scored below 80.
Yeah, and like speaking of Nier again, and there will be no spoilers here, but based on what I've played so far and my knowledge of the previous game, which I didn't really play, I played a little bit. It was really rough, and I stopped playing it. But based on what I've been playing and seeing some of the reviews, and it's been reviewed pretty positively, and the word of mouth on it has always been strong regarding its writing. But man, with that, if I was forced to put it on like a numerical score, I'd be putting that game around, and I'm talking the remaster right now. And I have not seen all the content, so my opinion may change. But just from what I've played and what I've had to go through to get as far as I have right now, and for those who may be aware, like already there's the different playthrough things. So I'm just finished playthrough 2. So based on that, man, I'm gonna have to say like a 7, and even to some extent
Man,
like
that's hard.
how much. 7's pretty harsh, and I almost want to put it at a 6 because one of the criteria for getting the rest of the endings, which require it is required to get the next set of endings, and then where a lot of the new content is, the newest content is at the end after you. There's a new final ending. Sorry, that's the only spoiler I'm going to say, but you should know because that's understanding how to get the full experience of the game. I don't think should be considered a spoiler in the most vaguest of terms, and that's the most vaguest of terms I can give it.
Yeah.
So with that, and I don't know what's there. I just know it's apparently substantial and it's there. I don't know how I feel about that, considering that for someone who's new, someone who's never played the previous games, okay, fine. But even that, I'd have a hard time recommending to someone without knowing that they have a high tolerance for doing the same thing literally over and over again. So, yeah, man,
I'm not as far as you, so maybe it will bother me less, or maybe I'll get to that point where I feel the same.
And you know what? I even give it like I think the narrative design is tons of points. Like the narrative is great, but what the mechanical hoops that you have to jump through to get to that is where it starts to be bad because there's stuff you can miss, and where you literally would have to restart your game and spend hours getting to there and using guides to try to make the most efficient run to get there as quickly as possible. And of course, the first time you're playing it, you're absorbing all that story for the first time and finding these locations, and that's going to take longer. And then on the repeat playthroughs, you know how to mainline it through the things that are the same, and then you experience the things that are new, and it takes I was like to get through playthrough 1 for me, doing everything that I did, and I'm kind of trying to 100. I'm not truly trying to 100% the game, but just do enough that I think's good, which includes doing all the side quests. Which you don't need to do all the side quests to get all the games. Luckily, you just need to do the ones that are included with meeting the certain criteria, which I won't spoil for people if they want to go look up the criteria. Go look up the criteria. But yeah, man, that's where I'm getting to like I'd say a 6 because I think that's unreasonable. Making stuff that missable that can lock off huge amounts of content and require people to replay it, that's bad. And even on like a smaller scale, let's say Returnal, like right now people are having a huge problem because Returnal being a roguelike and requiring such long times for runs and things like that, and not having the saves and the auto saves and then the random crashes on top of that, and then losing progress to auto updates in sleep mode. Like that's just stuff where it's not respecting players' time and the player did nothing wrong, but you could still lose tons of progress and waste tons of time. And I think that's in general like a problem. So that's where like with the review scores I would rate it a lot lower, but at the same time I prefer the idea of the statement ratings, and I would be like rent it. Like my favorite scale is a buy it, rent it, rent/try it, or ignore it, because rent/try would be like, hey, I don't know if this is the right thing for you. It's got some good points, it's got some bad points. It may not be exactly for you, but if you can either go out and rent it or try a demo or borrow a copy from a friend,
some people might not know where to go to rent it.
It might not, but there's you can figure out. Like the internet exists, and if you're playing video games, you probably know how to try stuff, and demos are not a secret. But then then you have the extremes where it's like, oh yeah, I can highly recommend that for the most part, regardless of this, you should buy it, or you should totally play it, play it, rent it, try it, and ignore it. And then I think, because even at the highest, the best you could say is, yo, play this. It doesn't matter if you buy it, doesn't matter if whatnot, but you should totally play this.
What about like throw it in the trash?
And that's ignore it. And then that's the thing there. Like, yeah, no, in general, I would not recommend this to anyone except if they had a passing curiosity to this. So you can completely ignore it, and if you try it, that's your decision.
What about
and then there's a third one below that, the fourth one below that, where it's go to the stores, take the games off the shelf, and throw them at a bonfire in your backyard. It is that bad. Like, it's not just ignore it. You have to give enough attention to it to destroy existing copies.
No, you gotta give it to your worst enemy.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
That's hilarious. Yeah, so I prefer those kind of statements or ratings, but that's at the same time where it's like Nier Replicant is and even I'll say to Death Stranding, they are curiosities in games that are extremely experimental, and it's just hard to recommend them to people, but I want to still be able to go, you should look at this. And I don't think the numbers communicate that well enough because people, it's expensive. Gaming is not a cheap hobby unless you're like going for exclusively indie games and stuff like that, and always buying on sale and buying secondhand and things like that. And that makes it tricky. So there might be stuff that's worth people's time, but it's tough to recommend it when it's like, hey, I'd probably give this like a 6 because Death Stranding, it's like that's a specific type of game with a very specific type of flow. And even for other people like Universal games like Tetris or Mario Brothers, like sure, anyone can play those, but is that to everyone's interest? No, no game truly is. And that's when we have like the 10s. It doesn't mean perfect. There was that whole debate before about, oh, does 10 mean the game's perfect? Like, no, 10 is supposed to be the highest recommendation you can give. Like, if you are interested in video games, this is a game that you should be interested in or should want to check out. So kind of skipping past all that debate. So that's where I land in reviews. I would prefer to see more statement-oriented stuff, the pro-con lists and whatnot, and good editorial. And of course, I'll give a free plug to Tim Rogers' in-depth reviews because that's just he knows how to make very extreme, entertaining
Is he
content.
the one who did like the 30-minute review of Dragon Quest XI?
Yes, and the three.
That was pretty good, and he did it of Death Stranding too, right?
Yeah, he's written some very long articles for Kotaku, and now he has his own YouTube channel. And let's see here, that's his Patreon thing. He's doing. Let's see. I want to make sure I'm getting. Nope, not him. Tim.
Yeah, I think I watched his video of Death Stranding and of Dragon Quest XI, and they were both very good.
Oh, you should check out his new stuff. Okay, so his YouTube channel is Action Button on YouTube, and he has done 5 reviews so far. The first one is Final Fantasy VII Remake, so don't watch that since I know you're going to play that. Then he reviewed The Last of Us, so I'd say go ahead and watch that one. Review Doom. Actually, I'd recommend the Doom one as the first one for anyone. No, Pac-Man. Watch the Pac-Man one first, and then go to Doom. And as long as you've played Last of Us or Final Fantasy VII Remake or don't care about spoilers, go ahead and watch those two. And then the latest one he did is Tokimeki Memorial, which is a Konami dating game that was made for the PlayStation 1 era that is only Japanese. That he knows Japanese. He lived in Japan for years and whatnot. And he'll explain all that to you. And that was like, after he goes through and breaks it down in such a great way, and it's a AAA dating game for its time. It's insane.
Interesting.
Yeah. This is like when we were talking about 13 Sentinels and how unique a thing that is. And that like this is like that, but in like the 90s. It's like that level of oh man, they like the effort that's put into this. Or maybe that's not the best comparison when it comes to effort in my opinion, but that's 5 hours and 56 minutes. Pac-Man is 2 hours and 55 minutes. Doom is 3 hours and 30 minutes.
Those are videos that
those are reviews, yes.
For 3 hours he reviews stuff?
Yes.
I'm gonna have to look into this.
Yeah. Start with the Pac-Man one.
So you one thing you said so the idea of a 10 out of 10 game. I mean, are there any games you can think of that you would be comfortable giving a 10 out of 10? I was thinking about that, and I don't know, because I feel like there's enough games where I think I could love a game like 100%, and I still almost don't feel like I can give any game a 10 out of 10. To me, it just feels like there isn't such a thing.
So yeah, I go for more abstract concepts. So I think that you could call it a cop out if you want, but I think to me a 10 out of 10 means highest recommendation. It's a show of its class in its genre or in video games for what it's trying to do. Now maybe you'd want to say that for Death Stranding. I wouldn't necessarily disagree, but I understand that perspective. But I would say
it's the only game in its genre, and it's the best game in its genre, so obviously it's a 10 out of 10. The Strand game?
Yeah, it's the only Strand game. But like, let's say I would give the original Final Fantasy VII a 10 out of 10. I think if anyone's interested in Japanese RPGs, you should play Final Fantasy VII, the original PlayStation 1 version, in whatever form you choose. I would highly recommend it. Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, same thing. I think those are games that transcend, that they are an example of the genre and of their time and were pioneers in their mechanics and executed and pulled it off really well. I don't know if I necessarily agree with Mario 64 in general, but out of historical respect, I would be willing to agree with anyone who said that it was a 10 out of
What
10 as
about
well.
Pokemon? What about
Uh,
Pokemon?
you know what? I don't think, no, because Pokemon Red and Blue are just new types of JRPGs. I would not give them 10s. They would be 9s. I would say they're 9s, but I don't think they are, um, compared to the other genre which exists,
But yeah.
they are not they're not excelling in their field or pioneering too much. Maybe I didn't phrase that exactly the way I wanted, but I think it's in its class. No, they are not perfect games. They are not 10s, or I shouldn't say perfect games because that's the misnomer. I wouldn't give them the highest recommendation. I don't think anyone should play Pokemon. Anyone could, but I think there's enough to say no. Like if I need
But
you to
does a
play an
10 out of
RPG,
10 really mean that everyone should play a game?
no,
Like
no,
a game can have limited appeal but still be a 10 out of 10. Well, or maybe
no,
it
no,
couldn't. I don't know.
oh no, I mean like there isn't a single person that if they said to me, "Hey, what do you should I try Tetris?" There isn't a single person I would say, "No, don't try Tetris." I'd be like, "You should give
Oh.
Tetris a try." Like that's what a 10 means to me. If someone asked me if that game, is there any chance I would say no or be like nah, ignore that. No. I would anyone who asked me of that, I would say you should play that game. That's what a 10 means to me. Or I'd say like you should probably give that game a try because it will probably be if not a great
You
experience
tell me
for you.
if Mike asks you should I play Final Fantasy VII, you tell him yes.
I would say if Mike came to me and said, "I want to try a Japanese RPG. Where do you think what should I try? What's a good Japanese RPG?" The first thing I would say was Final Fantasy VII. Like try
Well,
that game.
he'll never say that, so you don't have to worry about
Right.
that.
But that's the kind of conversation I'm talking about where if someone
Okay.
asked me about a thing, I would say like what games should I play? And I'd be like, you should totally play this game or this game or this game or whatnot. And of course we could go cross genre. I'm not a huge RTS fan, but like if someone said to me, should I try StarCraft? I'm like, StarCraft 2 is apparently really good. A lot of people like it. You should probably try that if you want to try RTS games. I've also heard a lot about Final Fantasy Tactics. Now I've played it myself, and it's not as easy to access, so that might be a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, that's a game
But
that I
stuff
feel
like
like needs a release on the Switch. But I'm sure everyone could come up with. Where is Final Fantasy Tactics on modern consoles?
It's on phones now. They made a new
Yeah, but
Tactics mobile game. It's not called Tactics, but it's a Final Fantasy game, and it is Tactics gameplay, but with gotcha elements, like you do
no,
on mobile.
Final Fantasy Tactics is on iOS, but it's got touch controls.
No, I meant they made a new one. They made a new Tactics style Final Fantasy game.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
gotcha game.
That's what a 10 means to me, and that's how I think it should be thought of. Is just like, oh, this is the highest positive recommendation. Like, if you are looking for a game to play in this type of genre or looking to try this genre for the first time, this is one of the top games you should probably try. So that's how I feel about the scores.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's the healthiest thing. But like we said, we're getting hung up on these numbers, and I don't think that does justice to a lot of games where they can experimentally get one thing really right, like Nier does for the storytelling, or even for the story in 13 Sentinels. But like the gameplay, like I would not give it a 10 because of the way they do the gameplay. I have issues, and I think there's mechanical things where they could have achieved the same goals in much more efficient fashions, and that the experience of it I had issues with. But once again, these are super personal. That's where I prefer the more statement-oriented stuff. And yeah, I like to see in reviews. So let's keep the conversation moving. Is what do you like to see specifically in reviews? Is there like do you like to see just specifically like a breakdown of mechanics? Do you want a synopsis of the story? There's the old school style where there's like graphics and sound and audio. It's like, when you're reading, what are like the bullet points you're looking for?
Well, I would say one thing that I often like to get a feel for from a review, which this is subjective, so it's really
Oh, of course.
hard to really take a reviewer's opinion for it. As I like to understand what the difficulty of the game I'm walking into is. Just
Hmm.
because I don't usually like anything that's too challenging,
Hmm.
but I also don't want it to be too easy. So, but this is such something that's personal. So I tend to kind of look across a number of views and see how people feel about it. I might read forum posts. So that's difficulty is a big thing to where if I'm going to play through a game, I want it to be something that is, at the right level for me. So
Hmm.
that's definitely one where I tend to do a little research before I buy a game. Um, just as a recent example, it's not out yet, but I think it's coming out next week. The Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne HD remaster, which is it's a notoriously a difficult game, but I also saw that they added a merciful difficulty, which apparently from the reviews I'm reading is way too far in the other direction, where it just makes things just a complete cakewalk. So now I'm like, I kind of want to play the game, but do I really want to like? I don't want to. I don't want to cheat myself out of the opportunity to get the full experience. So I'm kind of on the edge of that because I don't know if I'm up to the challenge, but I kind of want to try it. So maybe I should just, you know, man up and give it a shot. But that's definitely one where I like to do
You
my
gotta man up.
research. I know, I really do.
Yeah, and reviews should be personal, so it's completely fine to be like, you look for that. And I think that's an excellent point. Trying to understand what the difficulty it is to see if it's within your realm of comfort and or whether or not you can even do flexibility. Like, does it have difficulty settings? Because sometimes that is fun to play around with. Is sometimes games are better. You get to play them multiple times on multiple difficulties, or being able to adjust things. And that's a topic we want to visit in the future, is discussing difficulty settings and things like that. So quick shout out to like how Last of Us Part 2 has tons of accessibility and including difficulty modifier settings for everything from enemy behavior to like item and ammo resources. It's so crazy. And then you have normal games with like easy, normal, hard, and stuff like that. And there's games like Doom or Wolfenstein, the newer ones, where like their difficulty settings want you to skew harder. And then there's games like Dark Souls that don't have any difficulty settings and things like that. And it's good to know whether or not is something locked into it and whether or not you want to try it and what you're getting into. Or I will touch on Returnal because that's a little more prescient to this point. Is like, oh, how difficult is, like, I hear it's difficult and I typically don't like roguelikes, but I'm very interested in everything else around it. But yeah, transitioning over to Mike. So same question to you. What do you look for in reviews specifically for figuring out, whether or not you will or won't buy a game?
So what I look for, I guess I do like when they go over different things. I don't know if they do that as much anymore, but it's interesting when they go over like uh, visuals, sound, gameplay. What else am I missing?
Nope. There's visual sound controls or like difficulty settings, different modes and options. So like
There's
yes.
just a huge bug that flew in here to kill
Performance,
it.
performance.
Yeah,
I know
performance.
that's one that is important to a lot of people.
It's growing in importance because now there's
Yeah,
options.
yeah. It is frustrating
Oh,
when
also
they don't
like
get it
yeah,
right.
like story, like how good is the story, stuff like that.
Okay.
But
What's I
I
mean,
mean,
what's I is there
usually with
like
the videos, you could see like what they're getting at. Like they'll go over, they'll give you an example, and they'll show you like why this is such a good platform or so forth.
Hmm.
is there any specific Ryan that you look for, like something that you might not know about a game that's gonna sway your decision to try it?
Yeah, for me, it's typically looking for mechanical things just to understand, like, okay, is this game, how hard is this game, like you were saying, or multiple difficulty settings. Depending on the type of game, I'm more comfortable with dealing with challenge and adapting to challenge, getting good, quote unquote. But I have limits, I have upper limits and stuff, and I figured that out, and that's why I try to rent or demo things a lot more. Um, but then also performance, as you mentioned, is something I've looked for because I have my PlayStation 5, I have my PC, and I have my Switch. And if a game is cross-platform, I'm typically going to aim for the PC, but I will look to see if there's any specific reason why I might want to skew one way or the other. And, if a game plays just as well on the Switch as it does on one of the other platforms, and it's like multiplayer or something like that, I may want to skew towards the Switch, or depending on what kind of game it is, because I want to take it places. And that, if it performs just as well on there, but maybe it's like lower resolution, but I get good frame rate, I'll skew towards the Switch. I don't mind that. Or if there's some weird like a PC port's bad, or if it's exclusive to the Epic Game Store, then I'm like, all right, well I'm gonna get it on PlayStation 5 instead. I'll because it performs just as well there, but I don't have to deal with it with any shenanigans. Um, so performance is definitely something there, and I can talk about like with Returnal, I had this weird back and forth of interest where I first saw trailers, I'm like, oh man, this looks really cool. What is this? Then I found it was roguelike and my interest waned. I'm like, I don't really know. And then I saw more trailers that would look really cool. I'm like, ooh, I want to like this, but it's still a roguelike. Then I started seeing Digital Foundry's preview stuff of it, and I saw some gameplay footage and some like actual in the moment gameplay footage, and I was like, wow, this is actually like an action shooter, uh, bullet hell kind of game. And I'm like, what? Like, this looks so fun. I think I'm in. And then reviews started hitting, and then people were saying like, well, the game crashes. There's no kind of saving or checkpointing in the middle of it. So if your run's not done, there's only so much that carries over between runs and progress. This is what it is like to make progress in the game. Here's where the actual major checkpoints are and how long that takes. And I was like, oh no. And now I'm like, I'm out. And I'm like, I'm going to wait. I really want to try it. I think I might rent it, but I'm going to give it a while. There's other games that I'm going to try. Um, and I'm trying to think if there's any games right now because it's always a great story. Like when you're super wrong about a game based on reviews, like, oh man, I thought this game was not good, uh, but it reviewed really well, or like this game reviewed poorly, and then I tried it and I was like, holy cow, this game was just for me. I'm trying to think of any examples like that. Do you guys have any examples of that where like you and the review score didn't line up, whether that's a more positive experience or a more negative experience?
Looking at the list of games I've played recently. I mean, there's some games that like review a little better than how I feel, but I don't feel like I'm usually too far off from the general sentiment.
Hmm.
Like I don't think there's a game that I've played that is reviewed like, fives and sixes, and I'm like, this is totally underrated. What were the reviewers thinking? Like I think most of the time reviews are pretty on the ball, at least in they're in the general ballpark area, you know?
I guess I've gotten like sports types games that have reviewed lower just because they're just like, oh well, all they did was slap on a roster update. But all I do is play it. I just play against friends or whatnot. I'm not like going into like all these different modes and playing them. I don't really care about that. So it's not for me. It's not like, oh well, they didn't add anything new. It's just like that's all I wanted was the roster update.
Yeah,
But then again, I don't buy the game every single year. It's just
sure.
after so many years or whatever, then I want an updated roster.
Okay. So, gonna shift gears a little bit because there's new aspects to game development that should we should consider about reviews, and I think we should talk about it here, which is the advent and the ongoing um, development of like DLC and games as service. And before, games were much more static things, like they came out, maybe there was a bug and it got reissued or something like that, but rarely did a game ever significantly change, and that would require a re-review of it. but now we've got like MMORPGs. We've got the games of service like Destiny and Warframe and free-to-play stuff, and even mobile games and things like that. So the question to the room now is, with that, with ongoing content, and we'll start with just like DLC and then expansions later and stuff like that. Well, yes, DLC expansions or things that significantly change the game. Even like Ghost of Tsushima getting its multiplayer mode. What do you feel? How should reviews adapt to that, in your opinion? Do you think the scores should change and evolve with like an asterisk? Do you think that maybe the content should be reviewed in and of itself? Just how do you feel about that? And I'll toss to Ed first.
I think DLC should, I guess, depending on how significant it is, should probably be reviewed separately. Um, but I don't like the idea of going back and amending a score um, from what it was initially. I think that just opens up it a little bit to abuse, to where if something comes out and it's not necessarily as good as it was later. I feel like if a game came out and it's in a state that warrants a 7, I don't think it should be moved up later just because it gets more updates. Um, I guess unless it's just a brand new game. But then you brought up the idea of MMOs, and that Final Fantasy 14 was in a famously broken state when it came out, and then now it's one of the most you know revered entries in the Final Fantasy series. So it's tricky, but I don't know. I feel like I want the system to be one that doesn't give developers a pass to complete or improve their game later, knowing that, well, they'll fix the review score. But I guess then you have to take it on a case by case basis, because it is kind of about the intent. Like, I guess what it comes down to is I don't think Cyberpunk should get a bunch of, like, if they do change review scores, it needs like an asterisk that is bigger than the score on the page to let you know that this is a huge caveat. Like, this thing released in a terrible state, and we're not going to forget it. I guess that's a good example of kind of how I feel about it.
Oh,
I don't I
okay.
don't want I don't want a game to get away with releasing in a bad state and then later to be, accepted as good. I think there should be some sort of punishment for bad first impressions, because that's just the reality of the world. I mean, first impressions matter.
Hmm. I agree. Mike, how do you feel DLC and like expansions should affect review scores?
Basically the same as Ed. I think if there is a significant amount of DLC, then there should be like a separate DLC review for that. I mean, you could still maybe put it like in the or next to the review, something like that, like a separate section or something. Make like a little section like DLC or something like that. But I don't think it should factor into the original score, because I mean, just because you can make a game uh, uh, that, there could be a game that you make that's not very good, and then, oh, they add some DLC or something and it makes the game like awesome, but not everyone is going to purchase that DLC or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's not useful from a product recommendation standpoint, because you still want to know, is the base game good and is the DLC good, because they're separate purchases. Yeah, Mike's right. Like, you're spending money on each of them. So the existence of the DLC doesn't necessarily change the qualities of the base game.
Unless it's like the Game of the Year editions where like they bundle in all the DLC together or something like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Because I was going to say, Ed, just for a practical example, you played Fire Emblem Three Houses and you bought the DLC.
Yeah.
So if you were to like do a mini review right now, what would you score the DLC, the base game before you played the DLC, then the DLC, and then how do you feel about that impacting your score retroactively?
Probably the base game I put it a 9. I mean, I think it's
Mm-hmm.
pretty darn good game, although it's not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, maybe the DLC I'd put a little lower at 8, just because it didn't really capture exactly everything that I liked about the base game. A lot of the reason I played the DLC is because you have to beat every aspect of the side story to be able to use all the new characters and other content in the main game. So, it's kind of, that's how you earn access to all the side content, is to finish the whole. But I did enjoy it. But I'd say its existence doesn't really make the base game better or worse. But I'd say the base game is better.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. And I think you both made great points about, like, I don't think we should erase history because of new content or patches. I think it is fair to update a game's like rating and recommendation. So I think it's fair that Cyberpunk, like for example, if Cyberpunk manages to fix a large number of its issues and maybe even puts in a new feature or two, does that game can you go from like a like 7 out of 10 to like a 9 out of 10 on that? Yeah, I think that might be fair, but like you guys are saying, I think there should be a record that, hey, on release this game was like a 6 or a 7 based on what you want to say.
But
So like,
it did review well. It has an 85% on Metacritic, so it actually reviewed pretty darn well, all things considered.
right, and I having played it on PC, I agree that there's a lot to like in that game for what was there, and it just really sucks that there were bugs, and I would give that game more caveats because you can have some bad bugs when it comes to like progression blockers and stuff like that. Luckily I never had anything permanent. I didn't lose any save files, but I believe there were some issues like that. And that's not even counting on the console versions, which didn't run very well in general. So it's a very interesting situation there when it comes to that. But yeah, I think it would be it's good to bring up right now. Like Steam has its rolling review thing now for user reviews and stuff like that, where it says like most recently people were rating this game as positive or negative, and then that like updates and there's like a chart you can look at and see that data and be able to tell when people started rating it better or worse, and kind of be able to correlate that to like patches or updates and things like that. So I think, yeah, for service games the best thing is just having a history, and especially for games that do like big expansions, not just the MMOs, but like say Borderlands. I completely agree with you guys. The base game is what it is, kind of, and then the extra content can be rated separately because it's a separate optional purchase. And then, you know, what would I say if Borderlands 3 came out with all 4 expansions right away, or if someone was like waiting and then bought all of them, would I rate it higher? Yes, I would rate that package higher because it's so much more content, and since it's all co-op, like being able to play all of that with your friends, and especially after all the quality of life fixes for the most up-to-date version that they have, yeah, I would totally rate it higher and say like jumping in now is much better than jumping in at launch. So I think we're all in agreement there. So that's that's pretty open and shut when it comes to that. But hopefully some patches could make things worse or whatnot. Uh, at the same time, and I prepped for this beforehand with you guys, so I figure we'll talk about it now. Is reviews affecting developers' uh, wages, like getting bonuses off of reviews? I don't know if there's much we can comment on other than our feelings as consumers on that. I think it sucks in general that the publishers will put bonuses in for developers based on review scores because of the nature of things being so subjective. And then, as we were saying, like a lot of places don't even have numbers, and Metacritic with their aggregates, especially if the bonus is dictated, like specifically the Metacritic number, that stuff is just not good. It should be directly related to sales, and they should just get compensation based on how well it does exceeding that, because it's a much more reliable number. The only situation where that doesn't end up being fair is if a game reviews really well but doesn't sell really well. And I could definitely say from my personal experience, like Okami is a completely underrated game in terms of it hasn't sold as well as it should have, despite basically being like a more creative, imaginative
And
Zelda-like.
despite being on everything these days,
They
hasn't it been
ported
ported
it.
to literally like every platform? I wonder what its lifetime sales are. It's
They're
got to be a
still
lot now.
no, it's
It's
still not
not.
that great. You could look it up. I'm not sure what the exact number is, but it's still not that great.
Final becomes a million seller video game November 7th, 2019. So it took over 13 years to sell a million copies. Wow.
Yeah. Now, a lot of that I blame on Capcom with poor marketing decisions and not really pushing that game, because it was at first it was a PS2 exclusive and it was at the end of the PS2 life cycle, right before that game, right before the PS3 was coming out. And then also, I know it's like a niche Japanese art style game, but I don't think that's a disqualifier. They had like no commercials. I don't recall like any sort of commercials for that game. So they weren't pushing it. They weren't trying to make a big deal out of it from what I remember in terms of like US marketing. Uh even and I forget for the time frame if there was really much for online marketing, which probably not. So most of it would have been in game magazines and like game previews. Then it comes out and it's like getting 8s and 9s because it's such a huge game and it's really well done and it's unique art style and all the I could heap praise on it for just about any traditional action game. Very Zelda-like, cute story, fun, and just a big adventure and unique setting and visuals, great music. And man, you're like, yeah, it's an exemplary like swan song of a game for a platform, but it came out on
Yeah,
the
I
wrong thing.
think I think I had that back on the PS2. I didn't realize it wasn't advertised anymore. I had a lot of
Yeah.
weird games on the PS2, so I don't know. Maybe I had strange taste,
Yep.
but
And no, that's fine. And then they brought it to the Wii, which is great, but like they didn't have, but they didn't do much of a marketing push there. They did a port for, or they didn't do a port. They did a sequel on the DS, and the DS was, it was a low budget port in my opinion. It was a poorly thought out project because they made it for the DS, and at the time the DS was huge, but the DS was waning and the 3DS was coming out, and that game was built like a 3D game. Once again, putting a 3D game uh, on the D-pad instead of waiting, and then optimizing it a bit more and bringing it to the 3DS. That game with its visual style could have been a showcase, given like the extra time to be polished and upres and like done for the 3DS instead, and plus it would have controlled way better. So once again, and then they completely skipped the Wii U. And in my opinion, Okami on the Wii U would have been the definitive version because of the way that system works, where uh, back in the PS2, you pressed a button, it froze time and created like a parchment thing, and then you used the right analog stick to draw your spells for the different powers and whatnot. So the Wii U would have been perfect, where when you press that button, it pauses, and then literally the screen would have shown on the tablet, and you could have drawn on there using a stylus, and it would have been perfect. And then you unrelease, and it does the thing on the screen. It would have been great. And I'm happy it got brought to Switch. I'm happy it got brought to PS4 and X. I'm pretty sure it's on Xbox now. And then it got
maybe.
brought to PC, and that's great. And I bought it again on PC. That was the version I bought for the second time. Uh, and yeah, but still, once again, a huge game, a really good game that's just didn't sell well enough, and it's really rated positively. And that's the only time where perhaps a bonus for creating such a great game would have been great. But there's probably also clauses that, well, it has to be rated this well and it has to sell so many copies before we give the extra money. And so that's where it's like, I think it's better to be the merits on how well a game sells. But even though because there are games like that, and it can be so subjective, or like we were saying, there's outlets where one outlet could shift the whole average of a Metacritic because they're one of the bigger weighted ones, and then they give it a low score. So not that I necessarily agree with IGN, and I don't know exactly where they go with their review. So I know the score. We've joked about it before, but I don't know what's the content of the review there. But for all I know, and I may disagree with like them with what they say about it. But it is definitely an experimental game that's not for everyone. But it is a very interesting entry in the medium of video games. So yeah, I think that's problematic. Did you guys have any thoughts about review scores affecting developer wages and stuff like that?
It's tough. I mean, like it makes sense for your bonus to be tied to some level of perform metric of performance. And I mean, that's true for a lot of people. Like your bonus is always tied to some level of company performance. And it only makes sense that if you worked on a game, that your bonus should somewhat be contingent on whether it sells well or reviews well. But it does kind of suck if you feel like you're getting the short end of the stick on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike, any thoughts there?
Hard to say.
Yeah, I mean, I could see why it's tied to how well a game reviews. But I can't see the other way around, like where the reviewer gets like paid off to like give a review really high score, or some of the other like corrupt things that go on behind the scenes. Like I know there was that whole like fiasco at IGN where that guy was like plagiarizing some like small YouTuber or something.
Well, that's different than the review thing. And yeah, a lot of people think that people get paid off for review scores, and that's from a lot of the industry insiders that I follow that are, YouTubers, podcasters, and whatnot. That's not necessarily true, but there is like a grain of truth to the fact that like the publishers go out of their way to like invite them to special events, before coronavirus and everything, would invite them to special events and would try to give people special treatment and things like that. And so that can create a perception of corruption, but there's a lot of writers who really don't do that. If anything, the bias comes from personal bias of do they like the game series in general, not necessarily that uh, the companies are giving them special deals in order to write these like BS reviews and things like that. So I do want to dispel that.
A lifetime supply of Klondike bars.
Right, right. It's more like also they're more likely to get access to future games early and special privileges for getting content early. So that's more of the kind of corruption that happens rather than review scores necessarily being directly paid for. So I just want to kind of dispel that.
If it has happened in the past,
I'm sure there's some smaller companies that have, or smaller reviewers that have tried to do that, but like the big outlets, that's not so much there. So I do want to reinforce that that's not necessarily what happens so often, or at least not in the biggest of the places, because those places are now big enough that they have the audience that they can flex a little bit of authority back at the companies to be like, hey man, like we gotta play ball here, or else things are, one of us is gonna lose out.
Yeah.
We'll both lose out. So, but also when it comes to reviews here, so there was some other specific stuff I want to delve into and just get our opinions out there. Was when someone doesn't finish a review for a game, or doesn't finish a game but then reviews it, like an incomplete necessarily thing. Do you feel there's value in someone just kind of doing like a non completed thing? Do you think there's certain circumstances where that's warranted, or what do you feel about like how long should someone play a game? And you can go into the different circumstances because there's different types of games. How much does a person have to play a game before you think you can do a valid review, and what standard would you hold yourself to? So I'll toss back to Mike. What do you think is that? How long can you play a game? And you can break it up into different types of games. Do you have to play before you have a valid opinion about a review?
Wow. I used to do no, I was gonna say I used to do these like reviews on YouTube of like 5 minutes. You play the game. It didn't necessarily have to be 5 minutes. Like I could have played it before, but I would do like this 5 minute review of like when I was playing the game. So
yeah, it's like 5 minutes from when you like start up the game, right?
yeah, that's what it was supposed to be. But like obviously, like a lot of the games I had already played in the past, so it was more like I had like a sort of opinion formed on them. But it was supposed to be like, yeah, like you start this game and then you play for 5 minutes, and and that's your review. Like that's your hard stop. So I think you could do reviews different ways, but I think if you're looking for like a serious review of like whether you're basing on if you're basing on like a review to buy a game or not, like you probably want someone who's like at least beaten the game, or if it's that type of game, like if it's I don't know if it's like an arcade game, that's different, but if it's like a game that you can actually uh, beat, I'd say you'd have to like have played through the whole game, not necessarily collect everything or do every little piece in the game, but just played through and beat the game. I don't know if you can really put a time on that because each game is so different in its length of time.
Yeah, agreed. So
yeah.
just a specific question to you, Mike, just to help with that. So let's say Mario Odyssey, because you breached credits on Mario Odyssey, right?
Yeah, I got up to the the secret worlds.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So how far? And you kind of answered this, but I just want to check using this specific example. So it's Mario Odyssey. How far would you be okay with someone getting before you'd consider their opinion legit? Would it have to be credits? Is there like an acceptable earlier point where you'd be like, well, they played through like the first 3 worlds, and if they don't like it, they don't like it, or whatnot? Or would you even say like, well, if they haven't played the secret worlds, like that's significant enough that I'd need to know about that in the review and how good those are. So using Mario Odyssey, where would you draw your lines for an acceptable play period to respect the opinion of someone?
I'd still respect it even if they didn't do a lengthy review or didn't play through the whole thing. But for me to like take it more serious, that's what you're saying, right? Like for whether I want to purchase a game or not, is that?
Oh sure, but we're using Mario Odyssey as an
Yeah.
example since you played it specifically. So like if someone
Yeah,
played and beat the first world and then gave you their opinion, positive or negative, how would you feel about that?
if somebody beat the whole game, I would be happy if I'd be happy with the review if they're like gave a final score and everything. Then I would probably compile that with like other reviews that I've seen, and I don't think that they need to go on and beat the secret worlds, but I don't think that they should just play like 3 worlds and then say like, oh, this is my review of the game. For me to take them like seriously, I mean, obviously, like if they're just like joking around or like doing like a silly like 5-minute review, or just like if they're just giving like their opinions on like the first couple of worlds, like that's fine.
Okay. And then for a different type of game, Mario Party, we'll say New Super Mario Party. Uh, what do how much do you think someone would need to play of that for you to like respect their opinion? 1 turn, 5 turns, a game at least.
I would say they would probably have to play all the boards at
Okay.
least.
Okay.
I don't think that's at least with a new game, that's not too much to ask.
Okay, all the games. Would you want them to play it on one of the specific turns? Because you can choose how many turns. So would you want like a minimum? It has to be like a 10-turn game, or what are your thoughts there?
Just the right, yeah. I think 10 is like the lowest, right? That you can go.
I don't remember what the lowest is.
Yeah, I think I'd be fine with 10.
Would you require them to have to play at least with 4 people, or would you be fine if they just soloed it against the AI?
Yeah, they can solo it against the AI, but they're not going to have as much fun. So like, I mean, I don't know how
Maybe
you
they'd
would
have less
know that.
fun, or maybe they'd have more
Yeah,
fun without people.
I
You don't
don't
know.
think so.
Antisocial people.
Yes,
It's like,
but
don't play this with people. It'll end
unless
friendships.
you, I just I don't know how you would know that. Like unless they said like I only played this by myself, or if they said, oh, I got together with a group of friends. I guess you could never really know if that's what they actually did, or if they considered the AI to be their friends. I don't know.
Okay, and actually we will come back to Mario Party, but I want to go back to I want to ask Ed the same question, but we're gonna go to more. I'm trying to pick the specific types of games that we like play, and me and Ed are kind of on the same page when it comes to types of games we play. So Ed, we'll use like Fire Emblem as an example, but the same thing. Story-based games. You and I play a lot of story-based games. What are your feelings on like those for how long someone could play the game or should play the game before you'd say they have a respectable opinion or respectable perspective to give like an official rating?
I think you should finish the story to the credits, and ideally, like, you try to at least attempt to experience some of the different types of content. Like, if a game has, like you talked about Near Replicant, like you had a lot to say about the side quests and that kind of design, and I don't think you could really have that opinion or be able to inform people that, hey, the side quest design is kind of outdated in a sense if you hadn't actually tried to do a bunch of the side quests. So I think, like, you don't have to do everything in the game, but I think you should try to do the main. You should finish the main story and at least experience some of the side content just to see what it has to offer. Like, I understand some of these games are really long and you're on a deadline, but I think you at least have to get to the end of the story.
So you wouldn't respect my 5-minute views?
I thought they were funny. But no,
Yeah.
I'm not going to base my purchasing on your 5-minute reviews.
What if it's like Fortnite or something like that?
Well, I've already made my decision on Fortnite, and I don't think I've ever watched a review of it.
Free
So.
free to play 5-minute reviews.
Yeah, you'd probably just drop in a game and die and like, oh, this game stinks.
Tic Tac 1 minute reviews.
That's gonna be the new trend. Nobody can pay attention long enough for longer than a minute.
The game gets a 9.7. Okay, bye.
Yeah, but I mean, in all seriousness, I think, like, for a story-based game, you should finish it, and for like a content-based game, you should try to at least experience the majority of the content. Like, I don't think you could review Mario Mario Kart without unlocking all the tracks. I think,
Or all the
and
speed settings.
yeah, I mean, you got to be able to do 150cc in 200
Isn't
in
everything
mirror.
unlocked? And the new one isn't deluxe.
Well, the
Isn't
new one
everything
is, but the original,
Yeah.
but if in the original, it wasn't all unlocked, was it, on the Wii U?
No, I don't think
No,
so.
and
Yeah, I think you
200cc was
gotta unlock
DLC.
all
It was a free update, I believe, but it was still DLC.
Yeah.
And that's another thing also is like yeah, unlockable stuff like that. So yeah, I'm with you, and I was thinking about that earlier because I was listening to a podcast and they had brought that up. I was listening to the Sacred Symbols podcast, and they were talking, and Colin Moriarty was talking about how he, for some reviews, he didn't finish playing the game, and he felt like, he'd put 40 hours into a game, didn't finish it, and how he reflects on that and thinks that, for some of those, he's like, maybe I should have just finished it. And for some games, he would want to change how he did it, and for other games, he's confident in what he said, and even sometimes he doesn't think his opinion would change. But I do think, like, for a game that's, if the narrative is like the main driving crux of it, even if the gameplay is poor, I do think that it makes a lot of sense for reviewers to have to finish a narrative-based game, because that is such a big part of what that experience is supposed to be. I'm not saying that's not a grind and that's not problematic, and I think that there's other things that should be done, especially like if it's a long story, if it's going to be like 40, 50 hours and whatnot, and higher, especially if it's like, The Witcher 3 and big open world games like that, they should give reviewers more of a chance to get those previews in and start the marketing cycle. But that's also, and that actually will lead me to another topic there. But I wanted to touch on like competitive games, because I'm big on fighting games, which is something that you guys don't really play as much, or I play a lot more competitive multiplayer games, more so than you guys. And those are games that where, kind of like what Mike was saying with the Fortnite, like, it's a type of game that it's meant to be replayed, so actually it's real small chunks and doesn't take long to review. But what kind of effort would need to go in? So I'd say like those fighting games are like content-based games, like you're saying, Ed. So different fighting games are different things. So sometimes they have a story mode, and typically they're having some kind of story mode or single player content, so you'd see how that goes. And you'd want to play a few matches, you want to try the tutorial mode, you want to try any other single player content that exists in the game, run a few versus matches with another person. You'd want to go online, try the different options there, and just see how well the connection quality is, and how easy is it to connect to friends versus how easy is it to connect to strangers, which makes it also tougher to review pre-launch because so few people have the game. Then afterwards, more people have the game, and how do the servers stack up? And that's another thing for like big online games, where are the servers going to crash and on launch? And yeah, people are going to have a hard time usually logging on first couple days for one of those big online connected games, but then other games, in a couple weeks it's fine, and then you can actually experience it. But what's that like? But I think it's also important that these games, and I'm not saying there really isn't an issue with this in the industry, but I just emphasizing that I do think it's important that the people who write the reviews for these games should be interested in the genre they're in. And
yeah, I was just gonna say that. Like, how familiar with the genre should the reviewer be?
yeah, and I'm not saying they need to be great at the genre. Like that's the thing. I don't think the skill level is mandatory. I would prefer these people be competent for the review because I think that taints the experience a lot. Is what kind of gamer you are, how experienced you are, and even like I'm not a pro fighting game player by any means. I would say I'm just above average because of my technical know-how and the willingness to learn the in-depth information and understanding. Even if I can't apply it all, I'm aware of a lot of the high-level stuff, and I can only do so much. And I'm enough to know I know enough to know my limits. But I think like that should be it. And like someone who likes JRPGs should review art JRPGs. But that also we were when we were talking about this beforehand, we brought up some of the other types of review systems where like Famitsu, infamous for its having 4 people review the game and then score it and providing their perspective and then providing all those scores with blurbs and information and whatnot. So what do you guys think about that? Do you think that is the smarter way to do it? And we can kind of do that right now online by ourselves because there's no shortage of people trying to review games and put their opinions out there. I mean, heck, we're kind of doing some of that right now. But what do you think about that as in like an official capacity? You think it's better to have like the multiple voices and for them to clearly point out where they stand on like the genre, the game, the series, etc. How do you feel about that?
Sorry, what was that? It was
The
I,
like
I
the
didn't.
Famitsu style thing where multiple people provide their perspective on a single game, and then you kind of get all that information together, which we can kind of do ourselves because of we can go online, we can read from all the different publications. But what do you think of that? Is that like the best way is comparing and seeing the different perspectives? Like, would you be interested? Are you interested in like what does a casual person versus a pro person versus like an experienced person or somewhere in between? Like, what do you feel about that? Getting the multiple perspectives on the game from different types of players.
I'm not sure I need them from the same publication like with Famitsu, but it would be nice to have like maybe the reviewer have a little profile of themselves just to kind of. And I guess you see, I mean I guess I tend to get that just because a lot of the games I find out about I find out through podcasts and stuff that I listen to.
Hmm.
So I kind of already know the kind of games that these people like, but it would be nice to maybe. I think it's a good idea to know who the person who's reviewing it to get an idea if you're gonna agree with their opinion. And that's where seeking different reviews can make sense if you if you know that you tend to agree with the opinions of this publication or this person.
Okay. And Mike, yeah, same question to you. Do you like seeing the perspectives of different types of players on a game? Or would you only seek out like a specific type of profile? Like you want people who are familiar with the game or the series you're talking about.
Sorry, were you asking me a question? My sister interrupted me. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was asking you that question of would you like to know the different perspectives of different types of players, like a casual person's opinion on a game versus like a pro versus like, us who are just like enthusiasts and fans? Or do you like to see the reviews from like specific types of people? Like you only would want to see it from someone who's like good at video games, played a lot of video games, or is like a fan of the genre?
I don't care. Whoever reviews it, it's not like I've seen reviews from random people on YouTube and stuff like that. I'm not like, oh well, this guy's not a professional, so I can't take his opinion seriously. So
But
I don't.
do you take that in consideration, like what their experience is with the game in terms of like, um, if it's a Mario game, like I've never played a Mario game before, and this is my first Mario game. Like, do you take that into account, or do you and look for like other opinions, or do you seek out a specific type of opinion?
I mean, first off, I'll usually check like the sources that I like trust the most, but then like I want more, and oftentimes like I'll even after a few reviews I'll get the game or whatever, and then I'll look at other reviews like after I started playing it, and so just to see what other people's opinions are. I'll do the same thing with TV or movies. Like I won't be able to see all the reviews before I watch the TV show or the movie, and I'll just go back and I'll just look at what other people think of the game and just get their opinion. I don't know. It's just interesting to me, I guess.
Nice. Yeah, I like to find out the different perspectives from different games, and that, me being an enthusiast of video games, I have more actively and consciously sought out different opinions and different perspectives on games. That's why I listen to a wide variety of podcasts and shows and YouTubers, and seek out those opinions, and try to understand, because it helps me better understand the things I like and why I like them, and figure out, trusted sources versus like, okay, they're on the same page as me. They like games for the same reason. So if they make a recommendation, this is this, or I know they're probably going to talk about this specific aspect of a game, and give me good information that I'm looking for. And it's not like with the internet we can't look up whatever we're trying to get. So there's definitely plenty of information, and yeah, we're getting close to time here. So going back to Super Mario Party, because this is kind of timely, which is they added the online feature, and so I just wanted to ask you guys, what do you feel about like a major function like that coming back, or being added so far into the game? Do you feel like that would move a review score for you, like when you add like this huge core feature to it? And I think online for a multiplayer game should be considered a core feature. So, Mike, we'll start with you. Do you think like Super Mario Party getting online like moves the review score up for you, or would you say it's the same?
Okay, so with Super Mario Party, this was like a feature that was added like 2 years after the game already came out.
Right, and it's still for
But
free.
yeah, it's still for free. It's nice. I mean, you can't really complain, I guess, but I mean, it should have been there from the start. So maybe I am complaining a little bit.
I don't disagree with you, so I'm not criticizing that. But how do you feel like that major feature addition affects the review score, or your
So
opinion?
I think, like what we were saying earlier, where you have like a separate little section or a little blurb or something and say like added online, like this improves the game by so much, or like this improves our original score to so and so. But I think you got to leave that original score in there, because so people can, for historical perspective, see that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even if you put it like right next to it, where you're just like this, adding this feature brings the score up to, and then you can have like a little box around it. So I think that's like maybe one way to do that versus just like changing the score straight out, if you know what I mean.
Sure, yeah. I agree with you. The historical context is necessary. Would you say that increases the score for you, though? Like personally, would you now rate Super Mario Party higher for having online, or are you
Oh yeah,
disappointed enough that you'd be like, nah, it's still the same. Actually, it's lower because it should have been there.
No, I'd increase the score.
Okay.
If I was doing my 5-minute review or whatever.
Ed, did you play Final Fantasy 15 at all?
Yeah, but I played it well after it came out, so I didn't play it in its original state. I know
Okay.
they added a lot and changed a lot of things.
Yeah, because that was the only example I could think of off the top of my head, not counting like MMOs and stuff like that, where a game came out and it was kind of flawed, and then they changed a bunch of stuff like in between it as a major single player RPG story game, and like
Yeah.
fixed a bunch of stuff on top of adding a bunch of supplemental content, and then complementary DLC, of course. So I was curious if you'd have an opinion on that. But yeah, so relating using the Super Mario Party example with it adding online like a huge core feature, how does that? What's your opinion there for how it affects review scores for you personally?
I guess it could change the score, but I don't know if Mario Party changes the score enough. But I'm not a big fan of Mario Party, so
Which is fair.
um
Every review is subjective.
trying to think of what game they could have changed that like adding online could be good, but I kind of usually when Nintendo adds online to something, they do it in a way where like they
Yeah.
get it sort of right, but not close enough. So I'm like, why'd you add it at all?
And how
So
many people are still playing Super Mario Party like 2 years later?
yeah, I
I
don't
don't
know
know.
why they added it. I think it's going to be some like growing Mario Party community now that they added online.
DLC.
The game might start selling better because now people can be like, oh, I can play this online with people, and that might actually increase sales.
Maybe.
'Cause now
Yeah, probably because of COVID, right? Yeah.
COVID's calming down, but yeah, still that, or just people playing with their friends, being like, "Oh, my friend," like we're not all located next to each other or very close, so we all, if we loved Mario Party, now that it's online, it would make a lot of sense for us to be like, "Oh, let's pick it up. We can actually play online. It doesn't need to just be Mike's copy because he's the only one who can play it." Um, so that I do think that could actually, I think that was a good move, and I agree that it should have been there from the start, and I'm glad it's free. I wish there was more that they could have done, and it's really surprising that it was like 2 years out that it took them. And maybe it would have been here 9 months sooner if it wasn't for COVID. Who knows? But still, like the
The
fact that it wasn't
the
there at launch is still
the
very. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say the big reveal at E3 is gonna be Mario Party, Super Mario Party 2 with online. That's gonna be the big reveal
The
at
big super
E3.
I
disappointing
hope
reveal.
the only the only game they
It's like when they closed that one show
announced.
with the Wii
Star
U
Fox.
game, that adventure, they're like Wii Sports thing. What was it called again? Remember?
Which
Nintendo
one?
Land.
Nintendo Land. It's like when
Oh,
they close
that
the
yeah.
E3 presentation with the Nintendo channel, like, hey, and this game, and everyone will go, really? That was your one more thing. Two more questions. One that's more of a serious thing, and then the other one that we might as well, as long as we're talking about reviews, is come up with our official option menu crew review system. So start thinking about that. But the question I did want to ask. Oh no, I lost my train of thought. This is bad. We were talking about reviews, talking about Mario Party getting online, and it was gonna be something about how do you guys feel about this thing as basically all the questions. That's basically the format of all the questions. Oh man, this is really frustrating because I had it and it was a good question. Um, oh yeah, that's it. Is there anything you think doesn't need to be included in a review? Like it just this facet of a game doesn't matter. Like don't bother mentioning it. Is there anything like that for you guys?
It's a good question.
Do you think like
Like,
the price? Do you think that price should be a thing? Like, or does that not matter? If there's going to be DLC coming up, do you think review scores should be affected by like how much, if there's that extra stuff's going to come, or what's planned further? If we know stuff's planned in advance, is there anything like that you should think should or shouldn't be brought up?
I don't think any review should. I think it should be based on what the state of the game as it is now. So I don't think a review should include. At least it shouldn't factor into the impression or score of what is yet to come. So I guess that's one thing I don't think is worth including. Like I think it's good to know if there's DLC coming, but I don't know if that's That shouldn't be part of the review.
Mike, any thoughts? Something that you're like, this just should never be part of a review, or really isn't useful information.
Hmm.
So I was thinking about it, and I can't really think of anything.
I don't think the fact that DLC is coming is not useful information, but I don't think it should factor into the score. So I can see it being something you would want to know about in a potential purchase, but like,
yeah,
it's not out yet.
Maybe so like maybe like the amount of people that could play the game, like, does that really need to affect the score? Like, if it's like a 4-player game versus, is it a single player game?
That's
like,
a good question.
Yes.
I think it's important to note what type of game it is, but yeah, I think it being like, oh yeah, it's only going to be 4 players. I don't think that it should be a detriment. Yeah, like Mario Party will still only be 4 players. Yeah.
I was gonna say if like the new Mario Golf game, like if that was just 1 player, but it had like super awesome story mode, that's
right.
that's what the game was about. Like, should it really be knocked because you can't play it with your friends? Maybe.
I think it should be. I think there's an expectation that Mario sports games have multiplayer.
Mm-hmm.
But
interesting.
So then
whether,
I don't know. So then
I think the number of players and the number of, like, I know when we play, we're kind of disappointed that Smash Ultimate Online only lets you play with 4 players at once.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I think there's a lot of situations in where the limitations in player count could come into play as hurting or helping a game.
It's not necessarily the raw number, but then like what we've been saying the entire time is, what's that experience like? Is that experience still great enough as is? And then factor that in. And while, like, let's say the online netcode was actually great in Smash Brothers Ultimate, and it's like, okay, yeah, it's only 4 players online, but it plays really well. The lobby's really good. It's still that there's the fewer options. So like, and that's the thing. It's weird to criticize a game for wanting more when it's like, well, what's here is awesome, but I could still use more. It's almost like, and sticking with Smash Brothers, like it's us complaining like, oh man, there's 80 characters, but they still don't have Crash Bandicoot. 7 out of 10. Like that's I think that's a weird thing.
No Sora, 6 out of 10.
Right, exactly.
No Waluigi, 1 out of 10.
There you go. Yeah. So I think, and I, you know what, erring on the side of, if that's someone's opinion, that's someone's opinion, and reviews are, for the most part, supposed to be, our opinions, but with some, with trying to use a set of, I want to say objective to certain like objective things, like these things exist in the game, but then your interpretation is subjective. Some objective metrics and then subjective interpretation of those metrics. So, yeah, I don't think those are like invalid opinions, but I think it is an unfair opinion. So that's how I'd phrase that. Which you guys led me to one other question that crud. It was super good. Once again, it was
us picking our own.
There's that. Yeah, there is that. But actually, you sparked one more thing that I just wanted to ask your opinion on. I'll try to remember it.
It must be getting old.
Oh man, it's old and tired. We are recording later today, so my brain must be fried. I did a lot of yard work today, so that was also good. I was outside, so I must have gotten fried from that. No, it wasn't that bad, but yeah. So our official review system. So our official rating system of the Option Menu Crew podcast. So guys, first question is, do we do numbers, and I included stars? Do we do a numbered system, or are we going to do a comment rating system like we're saying, where it's like, rent it, buy it, whatever, or do we do like?
Well, I have an idea, and it's neither of those. I think it should be all 3 of us an America's Got Talent style panel where each of us get to like hit a buzzer, and if all 3 of us hit the buzzer, then nobody should play this game. So it's like we each have power of veto. No, but in all seriousness, I think like I think you're probably right that the score, we so much of our conversation today got up got caught up on what does the score mean. We keep talking about how does this affect the score, and it really shouldn't just come down to a number. So I'm kind of in the idea that I'd almost say even just like thumbs up, thumbs down, and read the review. And I do like the idea of having multiple people review a game, but obviously not everyone is always interested
What
in the
about
same
like
game.
thumbs up, thumbs down, and like neutral? Like,
I don't want to give you the opportunity to be neutral. You got to have an opinion on something.
What? All right. So here's an idea, and I'm getting wacky here, and I'm doing that on purpose. Should we? Maybe our rating system should be you have to describe it in the form of a food. Like this is a candy bar video game. This here is a buffet video game. This is a family cooked turkey dinner. I give it a Thanksgiving dinner out of food. Or something else like that we all have experience on. I like theme park rides. I was just like, this is a teacup ride of a video game. What do you guys think?
I mean, it's interesting.
I like
but
the panel. I like the panel of judges better.
I think people will
I just want to hit a button.
confused, like because certain people like certain foods and certain rides more. Like some people might be like, "Oh, I hate roller coasters," but I love.
Yeah, this is a big.
But that's
onion
okay.
Of a game.
That's okay. You like if I say it's a roller coaster game and you like I hate roller coasters, well then that game's not for you. The review was effective.
Not necessarily, because you could love roller coasters and somebody else could not love roller coasters.
But that's like somebody could love RPGs and some people could not love RPGs.
Yeah, but that has nothing to do with the game. Like they could love the game, but they could not. Like I don't. Yeah, that's.
Are you sure though? Are you sure it's not the same thing? It's like a home
Because you could be like
dinner. Well, this
could be like onions. Like somebody could like love onions, and somebody could like hate onions. And you could be like, "Oh, this is 10 onions out of 10 onions," or something like that.
Or this is a peeled onion versus a diced onion versus a baked onion. As Ed is the person who cares about food in a different way, but still a significant way. Like, does this mean different things to you, Ed? If I say like, this is a oven baked, this is a stove baked, this is a grill cooked. This is a microwave reheated.
This is like a takeout game or like a sit down game. That might mean something because I know we always argue about like is takeout food okay, and I'm like, but maybe if it's a takeout game or like a sit down game, I don't know.
Well, we can argue: is this freshly cooked? Is this the right temperature? Is this just hot enough, or is this like 10 minutes too long sitting out at room temperature?
I have an idea too.
Go ahead. Yeah.
What about like facial expressions? So like they would take a picture of you, but like you have your facial expression that is like based, that's your review. So you're like smiling and like really happy, or like like you're just like if you're giving it like a 5 out of 10, you're just serious or something, and then like 0 out of 10 is like you have like a really sad face, or like if it's
kind of like the old Game Pro style,
yeah, like angry face, but it's like not just like some animated face. It's like our face, like our actual face.
I don't think I want to put my face next to my review.
I was gonna say I want to take your idea and just turn a little bit, because I don't want us to use our faces at this point. I don't think we're that point yet.
Yeah,
but
no, I'm not saying
emoji.
like it's just as a joke. Yeah.
Oh sure, yeah, but in that lane, GIF, you rate it with a GIF. Like this GIF is my rating of this game. Or and Ed said emoji, which is about the same thing, but I like the idea.
There could be also like a drawing of our face or something like that, but I don't know. I don't think anyone would recognize.
I mean, you could do, I think, a drawing, but not like you don't have to do a drawing of your face. Like you could do a drawing, like this is my rating and this is my drawing.
Yeah.
That my drawing is my rating. That's fun too.
Or we could have like an official mascot or something. I don't know.
I mean, official what?
Official like mascot. If we had like some kind of like, I don't know.
How does the mascot do the rating?
The same, the same faces, the same face type deal.
Yeah,
like
the
their visual
style.
expression. But also, I do like Ed's idea of like the And I like those
judging
too,
panel?
but I really like the judging panel. Like, and then you got to have like Simon on
Yeah.
on there too.
Well, Ed, we can get you a buzzer, and then you can just hit the buzzer whenever you're giving us your review. So you don't have to. We don't have to exclude the buzzer. We can.
Well, you could be
include it.
eating food. We can do all three because you'd be eating food. You have your facial expressions, and you're sitting there slamming the buzzer.
That's it.
Yeah,
yeah, Ed's reaction. How hard he hits. How he hits the buzzer.
But all serious, I think, yeah, I'll give a buzzer or not. Mike can do his faces, and then Ryan can put out his food. So we'll all
I
have
will
different
only
scales.
metaphor. All my ratings will be in metaphors. It will be a metaphor. Metaphor out of 10. Yeah, and that's not necessarily the most creative, but it is there. So yeah, and I think
it's good to have a little like something at the bottom of the page to like tell you how they view the game like quickly.
Just imagine us writing a review and then putting all three of our individual suggestions at the bottom. Mike does his face, I put my metaphor, and it's Ed just pressing a buzzer. Actually, it should be all sorts of different. You should get a soundboard of different types of buzzers, Ed, and then that buzzer noise is your review rating. Is it an air horn?
Maybe we can get a soundboard for the podcast. That's what we need.
That is a good idea. We should do that. That could add some spice to it.
I think we'd have to be in the same studio for that to work, though.
Or
else it's just me playing sounds over the internet.
Oh no, we could. I think on Discord there might be. I don't know if there's a soundboard feature on Discord, but we could certainly figure that out. But yeah, that's a rating. Air horn out of 10 is a good rating system. So
Whistle.
Yes, I think it's been decided. The option menu crew rating system will be whatever the heck we please, and each one of us will do something different. So please look forward to that rating system in the future, and it is subject to change at our whims. So, too bad, listeners. Look forward to that. Those types of reviews there, whether or not we do them. I did not remember the question I was going to ask you guys about reviews, so I think. And I know I said it was good, and I still believe that it was good. I just can't remember it because we were moving on and keeping the flow of the podcast and getting to our endpoint here. But this was a lot of fun. I think this was a good conversation, and guys, thanks so much again for being here, and thank you to all our listeners who are with us today. Hope you enjoy some of the other episodes, and also go ahead and listen to other people's reviews. We hope that you figure out your own system and feel free to share it with us in the comments, what you like and don't like about reviews and stuff like that, and keep the discussion going, and just try more games in general. Just try more games.
All right, thank you for listening to the podcast, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye out of 10.